This is Can I Laugh on Your Shoulder? Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to get to talk with you today, Molly. This is fun.
This is going to be so fun. I have really been looking forward to this conversation ever since I picked up my copy of your new book, Habits for a Sacred Home. And I'm loving it so much. And so I'm really excited to just get to know you more and really learn a little bit about um, kind of your history and where this all came from and all of it. So let's to do that, we got to have you do what all my guests do, and that's give us the Jennifer 101. So tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today.
One of the biggest things that I probably talk about is my 7 children. I've been homeschooling them for 26 years. I'm graduating my 6th this weekend.
Wow.
And as a mom, I have dealt with a lot of fear in my life. So my first book was a kind of tell all, embarrass myself thoroughly memoir called Mothering by the Book, which was about how the books I read out loud to my children helped me overcome fear. But then, in the last couple of years, it's like the message that we are loved, that we can trust God, I think is so important. But then I'm like, but some of you ladies need to pull yourselves together and do something, because we have a lot of like impact on the world. I mean, mothering is like, could save the world, is saving the world, but let's pull ourselves together here a little bit and do what's set before us. And so Habits for a Sacred Home was based on the rule of Saint Benedict, and just how that having some Christian structures can actually really help us make an impact on culture. And most of the things, like making a dinner for your family, like that has an impact on culture. So these are some of my passions. Like reading out loud to my children has been a real theme throughout my years as a mom. And so the books are in many ways a distillation of all the books that I've read out loud to my children.
Love that so much. And also, you are my hero for homeschooling all 7 children. That is incredible and not a small feat. So, congratulations, by the way, on when we're recording this, graduating the 6 of 7. Like that is, whoo, I'm tired thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you what, I'm limping into the finish line. Like
Yeah.
I just did a meme on like a reel on my Instagram that was a remix, but it was this guy, he's running this race, and then he's falling, and at the end he kind of rolls in, and that's a little bit how it is, because high school, it has never been my favorite to teach. Like I love having a relationship with my high schoolers and reading books to them, but I'm not interested in dissecting frogs or teaching them algebra. And I'm really glad that we are able to outsource those things. So and then my last student he's amazing, like so amazing, and also so strong. And so teaching this last child has given me a run for my money.
Mm.
And I'm really thankful for amazing, like, co-op classes and tutors and all the things to help me like get through the finish line here, because I adored those early years of homeschooling where we were reading in a circle and watercolor painting and sitting by the creek and looking for frogs. But when it gets to the time to dissect the frogs, then I'm out. Thank you.
Oh man. Yeah, that was never my favorite either. Just like it's like I feel like that experience in my own schooling experience growing up is like forever emblazoned on my brain. How dare and also how bad the classroom smelled. Woo, it was
Oh,
terrible. Um, okay, well, obviously, like this did not, this passion for homeschooling and but so much of what is really in this book is what you've put into practice in your own family and in your own home. But this didn't just like happen. This is a big part of your story and your own journey. And I mean, I know I just personally am really curious as to how did you get to that point? Like, was this how you were raised, or was this something that was more gradual for you over time, or just came out of years of experience of raising these kids and homeschooling and then realizing that some of what you were putting into practice could actually help other families?
It was both because my parents, I was one of 5 children. I'm the middle of 5 children, and my parents did not have a lot of money, so they both worked, but they also were very intentional. Like, for a little while, they cleaned a Christian school so that we could have private Christian schooling, even though they were also working day jobs. So there were different ways that my parents were very intentional about raising us as a Christian family. And then fast forward to my own life, like my whole life as a mom, I have been so intentional. I mean, I love my children. I really wanted to do better for them than my parents did for me. And my parents really tried hard. And so I've always been very intentional. But I think in culture, I'm seeing like this, like, we're over here reading the Bible to our kids and having dinner around a table and being very um thoughtful about the decisions that we make with our children, and yet, like, culture's over here just, like, going off a cliff. I mean, schools, you can't even send kids hardly to the principal's office. You can't tell them not to do things. I just talked to someone who's in the military, and he said that kids are coming into the military, like, they don't really know even how to follow directions, and they don't think they have to either. And this is sort of like what's happening in cultures. There are some good things. Like, I love the messages about the destructive power of shame, or the messages that, there are no bad kids, there's just bad circumstances. Or, like, I do appreciate that we have a better, more holistic worldview of what's happening with kids and why they're in trouble. But I feel like we have gotten to this point where there's no culture, there's no healthy structures, no, like we're seeing the fall of Western civilization in many ways, with the way that culture is today. And so it it was a little bit alarming to me to watch, like, people, even in culture. We live in California, so for a long time you could stay home from work and get disability payments post COVID. They made it easy. And I understand, like, a lot of people were suffering from mental illness or suffering from disabilities, but then you couldn't really even go and get a coffee and use the bathroom. Like, they closed a lot of the restaurants were closed, bathrooms were closed. So it felt like in some ways civilization was grinding to a halt. And yes, we don't need a coffee shop on every corner. We should learn to make it in our own house or something. But there were a lot of things in culture that were partly the result of a lack of virtue, a lack of kind of a focus on virtue as a culture, or even healthy structures culturally, that were a little bit like, oh my gosh, like, how is this going to end up? Like, what kind of world are my children going to be raising their children in, if you can't even, for instance, teach a classroom of children because it's too disruptive. And so, as I was looking at that, I was like, also remembering some of the books I'd read, like How the Irish Saved Civilization, or the Benedict option, books like that, where they highlight how the monks sitting in their monasteries in Ireland and, in the mountains in Italy, were copying down the scriptures and keeping these kind of basic Christian structures, like praying together, having meals together, working together. And just looking at how these basic people with basic Christian structures really saved Western civilization. They saved the scriptures, they saved the text, they saved, I'm sure, a lot of the knowledge of, like, how to make medicinal herbs or something. And so as moms, I just was kind of convinced of the power of what we're doing. Like, we also are reading the Bible to our children. We also are eating a meal around a table. We also are looking our children in the eyes so they don't feel like the only social interaction they get is from their phone. Like, what we are doing is so countercultural in many ways. Like, just being humans in relationship with other humans, as opposed to living solely in a virtual reality world, is countercultural. And I wanted to highlight in this book how powerful it is, just to be like a normal sort of 1980s human.
I know exactly what you mean. And I mean, I think these are some of the same conversations that my husband and I have. And our kids are, well, as when this airs, our kids will be 11 and 8. And, so we're kind of in that, like, pretty pivotal point in their, like, childhood, like, as we are raising them. And so often sometimes I'm like, am I doing the right things? Like, am I going to screw my kids up? Like, are they probably going to, like, go to therapy over this? Like, probably, but but we're really trying to be intentional, where sometimes, like, yeah, where we do things that look kind of weird from the rest of you know, our community or even some of their friends at school as far as like, pretty it's not that we don't want them doing activities because we do. I mean, my son loves basketball, my daughter loves piano and singing, and so like we but we don't overschedule them. And like actually when we're recording this right now, we're going into the summer months, and one thing that I decided to do this summer, I was just like, I'm not signing them up for a million camps. I'm not signing them up for, I think I've signed them up for like one, maybe two VBSs what they want to go to with some friends, and that's it. And I was like, I just really want this to be a summer for them where they can just go outside and play and just, like not over schedule them. And I realized that might, and I also understand that that doesn't work for every family. Sometimes families, have to have these camps and things like that because they're, both parents work. And so I acknowledge those caveats. But I was like, I want us to maybe do this a little bit slower, like have a slower pace, and just, yeah, it looks different. And that can in a lot of aspects, but like we are really similar to you as well. Like we prioritize family dinner as much as we can, if not every night of the week, most nights of the week, where we are at least gathering around the table for dinner. And yeah, those things are really important. But I love how you talk about how so many of these habits and creating these habits actually impacts not just your family, but it impacts your community and the people around you. For somebody that's listening that's like, that doesn't make any sense, like where do you see that? Like how do you see the ripple effects of these things from when you're really focusing on these habits as a family, as a home? How does that begin to ripple out and impact your community and those around you?
Yeah. Just that one habit of eating dinner around the table, there's a lot of studies that say that it prevents, children who eat dinner with their family don't have as many troubles with drug addiction. They don't have as many problems with obesity. Like they grow up to be healthier people. So just that first step is very culturally helpful. Like it will prevent homelessness. It will prevent drug addiction. But then when you also mix in, like there probably sometimes there's other people who stop by and have dinner with you guys, or there's other people in your community. Like we have neighbors who stop by, or we have, friends, or we host worship nights. Like when you also are opening the door to other people who maybe don't have that, like some of the people who come to our house do not yet have their own family. They do not have, they don't live by family. And so in some ways we become family to them. And there are also all these studies that say like loneliness is a huge contributor to mental illness and physical illness. And so, I mean, think about the life-saving practice of just inviting somebody over for dinner or having coffee with another human. This is like world changing. When we don't abandon actual human interaction, that in itself is like saving civilization.
Yeah, I love that approach so much. Um, and so I wanted to real quick, I'm going to read off the eight or excuse me, the habits that are in the book for people. And then I want to actually ask you about one that has been personally most impactful to you. And I realize that, the whole reason you wrote this book is because they all are. But they are the habits of work, the habits of stewardship, habits of prayer, habits of order, habits of simplicity, habits of stability, habits of hospitality, habits of community, and habits of balance. The one that immediately stood out to me because it is something that I think has been really just incredibly impactful. And I think just kind of how my husband and I, we try to live our marriage out, and like our family was the habit of stewardship. And I think that that's just like, I've talked about this a lot on my podcast, is my favorite Bible verse is 1 Peter 4:10. For each of you has received a gift, and you're to use that gift to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And so I love that word steward. And, you know, for people that maybe don't know what what is a steward? Like a steward is, you are temporarily possessing something that somebody else already owns. And then you are to the person who is the temporary possessor, then eventually gives account for what they did with that thing while they were in possession of it. And so when I began to think about, okay, if I am a steward of everything that God has given me, how can I be the best steward? How can I temporarily possess this thing in the best way possible that benefits others? So that one was like one that was just particularly impactful to me about how you talk about stewardship. In there's everything from your physical health to your relationship with God, your kids, your home, your finances, like all of it. It's there's so much that I feel like is encompassing. And how do you take good care of those things while you are in possession of them? And so I wanted to ask you, is there one particular habit in particular that, maybe even is a starting point for people, or it's been the most impactful for you in how you have, kind of structured your life and your home, and anyway, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. Because, the motto of Saint Benedict, and this book is based on the rule of Saint Benedict. The motto of Saint Benedict was ora et labora, which means pray and work. And so in some ways, the first chapter that I included, and maybe the most foundational, is work. Because it's like, if I was thinking about it as you're talking, I'm like, is it prayer? Is it work? Is it prayer? Is it work? But really, even prayer comes from work. Do you know what I mean? Like, if we don't set aside the time in the morning to talk to God, if we're not intentional about that and do the diligence, because sometimes even spiritual disciplines aren't fun initially. Do you know what I mean? Even spiritual disciplines require being faithful to it when it's not fun, or when you don't really have this like great sense of the presence of God. But if we are faithful to do the work, then we get the rewards of being, more joyful in our trials, or having more peace in suffering, or whatever it might be. And so I would definitely say the work chapter is just so foundational. Like, I think that it's, I think so many moms listening, it's like, you probably are too far on one side or the other. Do you know what I mean? It's like I have, some people I know who they can just hang out and relax all day long, get nothing done. And I mean, how nice for their nervous system. You know what I mean? How nice for the people who get to be around them when they're hanging out and relaxing. That's amazing. But not a lot is going to get done. And then there's people who are just like working all the time. And I would tend towards this side, where then you're not really able to be present. And I've had to work at being able to relax. Like, when my family comes over now, I let things go, and I just like sit on the couch with them, or play a game with them, and just be with my family. Because, I raised my kids, and I worked really hard. We lived on property, had big gardens. And then I'm like, wait a second, some of those kids needed more eye contact. Some of those kids needed more like presence. And so now when I get to be, when I have like, I still have a couple of kids that I'm raising, but they're 15 and 17, so almost done. But there's still this opportunity that I have to be present with even my adult children, to be there and listen to them and talk to them, and not be constantly distracted. And so I think, even that takes work, to like intentionally set aside whatever it feels like you want to do. And in all of these, there's a certain amount of thoughtfulness. Like, there's not a chapter on thoughtfulness, but the chapter on simplicity could sort of help you think about, like, if we are always so busy. Like, I love that what you're doing this summer, because you are being thoughtful about, what does our family need this summer? Like, yes, every family needs different things at different times, and probably no matter how you parent, your kids are going to want to talk to a therapist. Because if you're so nice, they're going to be like, oh, they were too nice all the time. And if you're so strict, they're going to be like, they were too strict. Like, one way or the other, your
I
kids are going
love
to need a
this.
therapist. So just don't worry about that anymore, listeners. It's like, just do your best. But I think that, that is the call, is do your best. Because I think so often we get discouraged, and then we're like, screw it. My kids, they don't respond to my parenting no matter what. And the biggest message of this book is really just faithfulness. Like, just keep doing the good things that you're called to, even if you don't see the results. Because I know a lot of like homeschool moms who devoted their whole lives to, raising their children. And then some of them, their children don't even speak to them. And they're like, okay, forget it all. Like, I'm throwing this whole business out the window. But actually, maybe just be faithful and trust that you sowed, somebody else is going to water and make sure the harvest grows. And you don't know when that's going to happen. Like, we aren't the potters, we're just the clay. So stay on the potting wheel and let God do what he's going to do, and just be faithful.
Yeah, I love that. Just like that word faithful, just one step at a time, moving forward, hopefully in the right direction, and trusting that the steps that you are taking in faith, like that the power that has. And yeah, and I agree with you so much, because I relate to that sometimes inability to slow down. And I was actually, my husband and I were having a conversation about this like a month ago. It was just like, there are times where I just don't know how to Sabbath. Like, I don't know how to rest. And I guess I should say, it's not that I don't know how to rest. It's that sometimes I'm like, I can't help but in my mind, like, if I'm trying to rest, think about all of the things I have to get done. So if I am resting, there's like this part of me that feels guilty, like I'm not accomplishing something, or I'm not doing something that I should be doing, or like I'm not checking things off of my task list or to-do list or something like that. Like, and it just ends up stressing me out. And then I'm like, well, now I just like don't feel rested, because I just feel like I've, let all of the things go that I should have been doing. And then I'm like, am I modeling this well for my kids? Like, I don't know. It's, and I don't have the answer to all of this. I was saying um, to my husband that I was just like, I guess that's why they call it practicing the Sabbath, is that sometimes you're not going to get it right because you got to practice. Like, it doesn't mean that you're acing the Sabbath. But yeah, I love that description of the word of faithful, of just making sure that this is something that you're just continuing to practice at and keep at, and all of that. Well, one of the things that you had mentioned kind of in the beginning of our conversation was, you were talking about how like sometimes it can feel really overwhelming to look at the world around us and just think about the chaos, and just there's so much. And especially like when this airs, like we are heading into the depths of an election season that is just stressful, and it's just everybody is up in arms, and like no matter what, it's part of me is always like, guys, we have a presidential election every 4 years. Like every 4 years, it's like whoever does or does not get elected, like the world is going to heck in a handbasket, and like it's just the end of the world no matter who is getting elected or not elected. And but then you just you see the news, like we were at lunch the other day, and they had a TV on in the restaurant that had 6 sections in it, and it was 6 different news channels, and every news channel, Jennifer, was like basically like talking about the end of the world and how all this is terrible, and and I was like, I can't, this is too much. It's too much. And so it can feel really exhausting when we are inundated with just negativity. And obviously, like, there's a whole lot that I think, should be and can be said to what are you filling your mind with? Are you watching news all day? Are you just scrolling social media all day? So like, of course you're going to feel like the world is ending. So I guess there's kind of a 2-part question is, what are some of those dangers that are, can come with focusing too much on the chaos around us and what's going on in the world? And what is the alternative? Like when we're really trying to, rather than like completely shut ourselves off from the news and have no idea what's going on, how do you strike and find the balance and then live that out in your own home?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question because the news is propaganda. I mean, one way or the other, they want us to be afraid and on edge and worried that the sky is falling. So we'll do whatever they want us to do. Do you know what I mean? It's like on both sides, there's an element of like bad news sells, and we need people to be like up in arms so they'll support us and keep watching what we have to say. And so I think if you look at scriptures, there is there is good news there. It's like Psalm 37 says, "Yet a little while, and the wicked will be no more. You'll look for his place; it will not be. But the meek will inherit the earth and delight themselves in the abundance of peace." So peace is the promise from God. And in the Benedictine tradition, they read all 150 Psalms every week. And I think that if we were at least reading a psalm a day, or at least reading the Psalms as much as we were looking at the news, we'd be a lot more peaceful. Do you know what I mean? Because there is like, this is partly why I wrote the book. I mean, it was so alarming, some of the things. And now it's like there was all these food factories over, say, 2021, all these food things burned down. And so like, oh, there's going to be food shortages, but that really hasn't happened. You know what I mean? And then there was a lot of fires. Like we live in California, there were so many fires and it was terrifying, but we still have our home. Like, and so I know a lot of people in the meantime did lose their homes. And I know that for a lot of families right now, groceries are more unaffordable. And I mean, we definitely have had to cut the food spending a little bit or buy less of the fun stuff. But, we still are fine, basically. And so in this book, as you look at people like Sabina Wurmbrand, who lived through communist Romania, like just the worst of worst situations, was in prison, and they still chose God, they still chose peace, they still chose joy. And so I think that if we look at stories and we look at the Bible, we can be hopeful. But if we look at the news, we will be dysregulated and our bodies will feel awful and we'll have a really hard time being sweet with our kids. And so I think it does take a lot of self-control to turn away from that, but we really have to because it's so destructive and it's on purpose. Like they want us to feel scared on both sides. They want us to be terrified. And so we really just have to trust. I mean, I'm not saying, run for your school board, run for local elections, like do what you can do, but also, read your scriptures more than the news and you won't be hopeless.
Such good advice of just creating that balance, striking that balance, never going one too far one direction or another. I mean, I think that that's just kind of like the overall lesson in general for life. It's like moderation is key in pretty much every area, Jennifer.
So
Um,
true.
okay, so I've got a couple more questions I wanted to ask you before, like as we are wrapping up. Um, but I love how you include these just kind of, these incredible women of faith in each chapter. I actually learned an interesting, I haven't gotten to this. I'm only about halfway through your book yet. So, but I hadn't got to this chapter yet. So I don't know if you talk about this in it or not, but I just recently learned this, that on Ruth Graham's headstone, it says, construction complete. Thank you for your patience. And I just love that so much. And I'm like, can I steal that? I love it so much. Just such a great example of just that we're all works in progress. But obviously they're all incredible women of faith that have greatly impacted you. Is there one in particular that you're just like, if you had to pick one, who would you pick? And how has that woman in particular like impacted you, and why do you want to be her when you grow up?
Oh my gosh. Because one who's impacted me and one I would want to be when I grow up is probably not the same thing. But going back to Ruth Bell Graham, her I cried when I went to her. We visited her. We visited their little museum. It's a really cute museum near Charlotte. And when I got to her gravestone, I cried. I mean, there was just it's like so much faithfulness there. And if I look at these women, like I don't know that I could pick one that I would want to be when I grow up. Like what there have been letters and stories told about both Ruth Bell Graham and Edith Schaefer by her kids and others that make me think like that is, one of the best people in the world. Do you know what I mean? But then someone like Madeline L'Engle, who just had so much respect for the awe and mystery of God, and so much so much beauty in the words that she wrote. Like if I think some of these other ladies, they might seem more cut and dried, like straight up, like hardcore Christians in a way. But I also just love the way Madeline Engel expressed like some of the mystery and some of the paradox. And um so boy, I think I could say Edith Schaefer because she lived in Switzerland in the mountains and she was an amazing writer. And she raised Susan Schaefer Macaulay, who's one of my literary heroes as well. But they all have made such an impact on my life. And I'm so grateful for their work. I mean, for their faithfulness. Like, and some of them are very unsung heroes. Do you know what I mean? Like one of the ladies I include, Ella Tweeton. I don't know that anybody would even know who she is, but this book, First We Have Coffee, was such an encouragement to me in my mothering years because this is a mother who lived in the plains of Canada, didn't have a lot financially. Her husband wasn't very helpful or attentive, and yet she was just so faithful to love her children and to love her neighbors, and just such an example of faithfulness. And so, you know, I I think probably Madeline L'Engle, Edith Schaefer, and Ruth Graham are up there at the top, but they're all just such impressive women that it is hard to pick a favorite. How about
Oh,
you? Who would you pick?
man, I don't know. I was really trying to think. I mean, I love Elizabeth Elliot, obviously. Um, and Mary McLeod Bethune, like I just both of them just again, I think I particular relate to that the habit of stewardship. So like that one's just one that is like very near and dear to my heart. A woman that is not on your list, but is one of my like heroes of the faith, is Audrey Wetherell Johnson. So she's the founder of Bible Study Fellowship,
Wow,
BSF.
amazing.
So,
I love now I need to read her
oh
biographies.
my gosh, yes, it's called okay, it's called Created for Commitment. Hold on. I want to say yes, it's created for commitment. I was right. I was like, see, it's been a couple of years. Here's a fun fact about it though, is because do not judge a book by its cover. Okay. Because, Miss Johnson, who is a hero of the faith in my eyes. The cover of that book is she looks like Mrs. Doubtfire. And so I'm just like, really, it's everybody listening right now, you can just go ahead and you can Google image Created for Commitment by A. Wetherell Johnson, and you'll be like, oh, yes, it's a Mrs. Doubtfire cover, and it's very sad. But I love her so much, and her story is incredibly powerful. Basically, she was this English woman who was a missionary to China, and but she was a Japanese POW during World War II, and like
Wow.
she ended up like sharing her faith with like while she was in basically in prison, and then from that started what is now known as Bible Study Fellowship, which is like one of the largest, Bible study Bible studies around the world.
Yeah.
And so anyway, her story is incredibly powerful. So that would be my other one to add
Oh my
to your
gosh, we could
list,
just talk all
Jen.
day because then you're reminding me of Darlene Deiler Rose, who also was a POW from with the Japanese
Yeah.
and similarly powerful. But I'm so excited to look for that. Thank you for
Yes,
the
you will
suggestion.
love it. You will love
Yeah.
it. Okay, well, we are running out of time, but the last question I wanted to ask you is for you just to share a little bit about the Peaceful Press, because obviously this is another big piece of what you do and what you feel called to and to share. And so would you just talk a little bit about it, and especially for anybody that is either, in the homeschool community, or even if, you know, you are listening and you are not necessarily like feeling called to homeschool, but maybe there are resources there that you can introduce in your own family to maybe bring into some of these practices and things like that. So would you just share a little
Yeah.
bit
Well,
about
thanks for the
peaceful?
opportunity, Molly, because it is sort of the heart of what I do actually. And one of the resources that will be applicable when this comes out is the Christmas book flood. Because a lot of families who use our resources are not homeschooling full time. Like we have a preschool curriculum that really incorporates hands-on and motor skills and practical life skills. We have holiday guides like our Unearthing Wonder Advent and the Christmas book flood. And then we also have elementary homeschool resources that are based on beautiful stories like The Little House on the Prairie with the Playful Pioneers, or The Chronicles of Narnia with the Kind Kingdom. And then we have several others that use different classic children's books as kind of the core of study, because the way we've homeschooled for 26 years is by reading beautiful books to our children, talking about it, writing about it, and then it develops great communicators, but it also develops this beautiful worldview where we've highlighted kindness and goodness and virtue through the books we've read, and then it promotes virtue in our children as well. But like I said, whether you homeschool or not, you could get the book list. We have free book lists online. We have free samples. But I think families listening would love, like, our farm guide has all these fun fall activities, the Peaceful Loop or the Peaceful Press Christmas book flood, based on that like kind of Scandinavian book flood idea, has this really fun daily activity to do with your children and a story to read. So we have a lot of resources that are just promote connection. Our tagline is connection through curriculum, because we believe that families who are connected, who have strong attachments, are healthier and just more like constructive members of a community than families who've maybe heavily focused on sort of more destructive childhood practices.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Thank you so much for creating that resource that I know is such a gift to so many families. And I know I personally can't wait to just dive into some of these resources and bring them into my own home and my own family. And for the listeners, I will have all of Jennifer's information in the show notes, links to her resources, her books, all of that. Jennifer, thank you for being with me today. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thanks for having me, Molly. What a joy to get to chat with you today.